The skies over the Pacific were never still. Beneath the burning sun and vast clouds, dogfights ignited like thunderclaps, leaving trails of smoke that carved the names of heroes into the sky. Among these airborne warriors, one name burned bright: Thomas Buchanan McGuire, Jr., a pilot whose ambition, precision, and relentless drive led him to become one of America's top-scoring aces during World War II. His story is not just Tommy McGuire was born on August 1, 1920 in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and grew up in Sebring, Florida. He was always a curious and determined boy with a fierce independence and an interest in mechanical things. By the time he entered Georgia Tech, he had already started developing a fascination with flight. When the war broke out, he didn't hesitate. Like many young Americans, McGuire answered the call. But unlike most, his journey would end in the clouds with high by 1942. McGuire had earned his wings and was flying with the newly formed 425th Fighter Group in the 5th Air Force, under General George Kenney's command. The Pacific Theater wasn't an easy place to earn glory. Jungle-covered islands, oppressive heat, tropical diseases, and an enemy that refused to give up ground. But McGuire thrived under the pressure. He was methodical, calculating, and above all a marksman in the sky. Flying the P-38 Lightning, a twin-boomed, twin-engine aircraft that looked as deadly as it performed, McGuire found his ideal machine. The Lightning had range, speed, and firepower, and McGuire pushed it to its limits. Alongside another emerging ace, Richard Bong, McGuire began climbing the scoreboard of aerial victories. But as Bong's name began to dominate the headlines, something changed in McGuire. Admiration turned into rivalry. To understand McGuire is to understand his need to prove himself. He wasn't arrogant in the typical sense. He was intensely focused. While Bong was easygoing and naturally gifted, McGuire was the type to train obsessively, study tactics, and rehearse every move. In his head, some said he was too intense, but that's what made him deadly. Every time he took off, he was hunting. The first of McGuire's confirmed kills came during the tough air campaigns over New Guinea. In one engagement near Wewak, his flight intercepted a large formation of Japanese fighters and bombers. McGuire's P-38 dove into the fray, picking off enemy aircraft with deadly bursts from his nose-mounted .50 caliber machine guns. By the time the smoke cleared, McGuire had scored multiple kills and proved himself as a rising star. But it wasn't just about kills, it was about leadership. Soon he was made a flight commander, and then a major. His unit admired him, even if they found him intense. His ground crew knew how seriously he took his plane. He inspected every part before and after missions. He was the kind of pilot who would return from a long, dangerous sortie and immediately start debriefing his squadron on what they could improve. Despite the dangers of combat, McGuire had something many other pilots lacked. He was calculating. In the air, he rarely took foolish risks. Instead, he used elevation, timing, and energy advantage to pick apart enemy formations. He taught his squadron to use the P-38's high-speed diving ability to their advantage and emphasized the importance of teamwork. Yet for all his discipline, McGuire's rivalry with Bong was becoming more than professional. The headlines declared, "Bong the ace of aces," and that stung. McGuire had nearly as many kills, and he believed he could surpass him. The rivalry wasn't about hatred, it was about legacy. Both men respected each other, but McGuire wanted to be remembered as the best. By mid-1944, McGuire's kill count had risen dramatically. He had become one of the most feared American pilots in the Pacific. In the skies over the Philippines, particularly during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, he showed his mettle. There, amidst the smoke of burning ships and swarming kamikaze attacks, McGuire and his unit provided critical air cover. One of the most remarkable sequences in McGuire's career came on December 25, 26, 1944. In just 2 days, he shot down 7 Japanese aircraft, a feat that put him within striking distance of Bong's record. His name was now on every war correspondent's lips. He had 38 confirmed kills, just 2 short of matching Bong, but with every mission, the pressure grew. His commanding officers knew how close he was to becoming America's top ace, and McGuire felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. In private letters, he expressed his frustration. He wasn't chasing glory, he said. He was chasing duty. But deep down, he wanted that title. He wanted to be remembered. Then came the fateful mission on January 7th, 1945. McGuire was flying out of Dulag Airfield in the Philippines. Intelligence had reported Japanese fighters in the area, and McGuire, despite warnings about the risk, chose to go up. He was flying a P-38 named Eileen, after his wife. Alongside him were other experienced pilots, including Captain Edwin Weaver. What happened next is still debated. McGuire attempted a low-altitude turn in a dogfight with a Japanese Ki-43. Oscar! The maneuver was too tight, and his aircraft stalled. Some said he had slowed down to allow another pilot to get the kill, showing generosity in the heat of battle. Others said he was too eager to close in on number 39. Whatever the truth, his P-38 snapped into a stall and crashed into the jungle. He never made it back. McGuire was 24 years old. The war would end months later. Richard Bong, too, would perish in an aircraft accident, ironically while testing jets back in the States. But for McGuire, the Pacific was both the arena of his triumph and the place of his final breath. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and his legacy endured in the 38 enemy aircraft he shot down and in the fierce loyalty of the men who flew beside him. But perhaps more than that, McGuire's story remains a reminder of what it means to fly not just for victory, but for identity, pride, and the silent war that every ace fights within themselves. As 1944 opened its arms to an increasingly confident Allied war effort in the Pacific, the tempo of aerial combat grew more intense. For Major Thomas McGuire, this wasn't just a fight for control of the skies. It was the arena where legacies were forged and history was written in smoke trails. The P-38 Lightning, a machine that many initially questioned for its bulk and complexity, became an extension of McGuire's very spirit. He didn't just fly it, he dominated in it. Stationed with the 431st Fighter Squadron, part of the 475th Fighter Group known as the Satan's Angels, McGuire honed his role as both hunter and tactician. His success wasn't just about being a good shot, though he absolutely was. It was about understanding air superiority in all its nuances. He understood altitude, climb rate, dive angle, fuel consumption, sun position, enemy tendencies, and his own psychology. It was chess at 400 miles an hour. He was a numbers guy. He kept a small notebook where he scribbled enemy maneuvers, gun burst lengths, and engine RPMs for different airspeeds. That attention to detail made him deadly in combat and earned him the respect of the men under his command. They knew that if they flew with McGuire, they had a better chance of coming back. In early missions over New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and the Dutch East Indies, McGuire developed the signature tactic that earned him multiple kills. Approach unseen, strike fast, break away clean. He didn't play games in the sky, he hunted. Most of his kills were clean hits from angles that left the enemy little chance to react. He rarely wasted ammunition. When McGuire pulled the trigger, it was because the kill was certain. Despite this efficiency, his public profile lagged behind Richard Bong, who was being celebrated back home as the smiling boy-next-door hero. Bong had a kind of casual charisma that the press adored. He posed for photos, attended war bond events, and gave interviews. McGuire, by contrast, was all business. He didn't like being distracted, and he didn't chase the camera, But it wasn't just the press that noticed the quiet intensity growing in McGuire. His fellow pilots saw it too. Lieutenant Colonel Charles MacDonald, another top ace in the Pacific, once remarked that McGuire flew like he was building a legacy, not just winning a war. That single quote captured the essence of the man, driven, meticulous, and undeniably determined to be the best. McGuire wasn't without his critics. Some thought he was too focused on scorekeeping. Others whispered that he was taking unnecessary risks in pursuit of glory. But most of those whispers came from the rear, far from the front lines, where McGuire flew nearly every mission. Those who flew at his side knew better. They saw the pressure, they saw the burden he carried, not just of killing, but of carrying every loss on his back. When one of his close wingmen was shot down during a mission over the Philippines, McGuire returned to base in silence, his face pale and still. He walked to the operations tent, sat down, and wrote a letter to the man's family with a care and precision that mirrored the way he flew. He didn't glamorize it. He told the truth. The next morning, he was back in the air. The Pacific Theater offered no second chances. Combat wasn't just frequent, it was constant. Dogfights erupted out of nowhere. One moment you were flying over calm jungle, and the next, Zeros were diving at you from the clouds. The Japanese pilots were skilled, especially those flying. The agile Mitsubishi A6M0 and the Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar. These planes could outturn the P-38 at low speeds, and their pilots knew it. McGuire adapted. He kept his speed high, avoided tight-turning fights, and used boom and zoom tactics. He trained his men to do the same. If a Zero got behind you, you dove, full throttle, using the P-38's superior dive speed to escape. That was the strategy that worked, and McGuire turned it into a doctrine. In the late months of 1944, the Philippines became the center of gravity for the air war in the Pacific. American forces were pushing hard to liberate the islands, and air superiority was critical. McGuire's squadron was tasked with flying cover for bombers and ground troops, intercepting Japanese aircraft and striking airfields. The missions were long and grueling, up to 6 hours in the air, often through thunderstorms and blinding heat. It was in this crucible that McGuire hit his stride. In a whirlwind series of missions between October and December 1944, he shot down more than a dozen aircraft, including several on single sorties. His kill count rose to 34, then 36, then 38. He had almost done it. He was just 1 or 2 victories shy of tying or surpassing Bong. But by now, Bong had been pulled from combat and sent back to the States as a national hero. He had 40 kills and had received the Medal of Honor. McGuire remained in the field, still flying, still fighting. Some thought that unfair. Others thought McGuire wanted it that way. Being removed from combat for him was not a reward. His war wasn't done. It's important to understand that McGuire wasn't chasing Bong out of spite. They respected each other deeply. But McGuire wanted to beat the best because he believed in being the best. The P-38 wasn't a stage prop for him, it was his battlefield. Every time he climbed into the cockpit, he was fighting not just the Japanese, but the silence of being second best. His closest comrades began to worry. They saw him flying longer missions, engaging riskier targets, and taking chances that felt out of character. He wasn't reckless, not exactly, but he was becoming consumed. Then came Christmas 1944. While much of the world celebrated peace and family, McGuire was in the skies over Luzon, gunning down enemy fighters. On December 25th and 26th, he downed 7 aircraft, an incredible achievement by any standard. But it still wasn't enough to break Bong's record. Everyone knew he was close, too close. The 475th's intelligence officer reportedly told McGuire to ease off, that he'd already secured his place in history. But McGuire couldn't stop. It wasn't about medals. It was about closure. The missions that followed became increasingly dangerous. The Japanese were desperate. launching kamikaze attacks and throwing everything they had into the defense of their last strongholds. Every flight carried enormous risk. Yet McGuire kept volunteering, logging more hours than almost anyone else. In his private writings, McGuire never spoke about fear. He talked about discipline, about precision, and about loyalty. He worried more about losing men than about being shot down himself. That wasn't bravado, it was belief. He believed in duty, in leading from the front, in never asking others to do what he wouldn't do himself. One of his fellow pilots, Lieutenant Douglas Throp, later said that McGuire was the guy you wanted on your wing when everything went bad. He was calm under fire, always calculating. Even when tracer rounds zipped past his canopy or when flak exploded beneath his engines, McGuire never panicked. He simply acted, and yet, with each mission the weight of the war grew heavier. He'd seen too many friends die, too many letters written to grieving parents, too many mornings waking up with the quiet dread of not knowing who'd make it back. Still, he kept flying. Still, he kept chasing the ghost of 40. By early January 1945, the atmosphere in the Pacific had shifted. The Americans had retaken key ground in the Philippines. MacArthur's return to Luzon was well underway. The Japanese, though fiercely loyal and unwilling to surrender, were running out of experienced pilots, aircraft, and time. But that made them even more dangerous. The kamikaze threat was rising. Every mission meant flying into chaos. For Thomas McGuire, the end of the war was not yet in sight. Not for him. While others began to look forward to rotating home, McGuire focused on one thing, breaking Bong's record. At 38 confirmed kills, he was just 2 away from tying, 3 from surpassing. His closest friends knew that number haunted him. He didn't talk about it openly, but his actions made it clear. He began selecting missions with higher odds of contact with enemy fighters. He asked to lead dangerous patrols near Japanese strongholds. He was careful in the air, but his risk tolerance had clearly grown. Some of his fellow pilots began calling it McGuire's Run when he would go out alone or with a tight group. Into the more hostile sectors of Luzon, command tried to rein him in. Orders came down from above. No reckless engagements, no breaking formation, no low-level dogfighting. But McGuire had ways of bending rules without openly breaking them. He would lead a flight, engage when contact occurred, and claim that the situation demanded it. The truth was, McGuire was racing time. He wanted those last 2 kills before Bong's legend became untouchable. In late December, after the burst of success over Christmas, McGuire's demeanor shifted. He was no longer just chasing kills, he was chasing legacy. His correspondence changed. He wrote home to his wife Eileen with a tenderness that hinted at finality. In letters to friends, he spoke less of tactics and more of duty, of pressure, of completing the circle. There's no doubt the pressure weighed heavily. While Bong was stateside being celebrated as a national treasure, McGuire was still in combat, risking everything daily. He didn't envy Bong, but he felt the imbalance. Both were great aces, yet Bong had the title. McGuire wanted his place in history to be equal, if not greater. Then came January 7th, 1945. That morning, intelligence reported that a Japanese reconnaissance plane had been spotted near Negros Island. There were also whispers of enemy fighters nearby. McGuire, already known for jumping at high-risk opportunities, quickly assembled a flight of 4 P-38s. Himself, Captain Edwin Weaver, Lieutenant Douglas Throp, and Lieutenant Walter Benham. The Sihemu mission was unofficial. It wasn't on the squadron board, and it hadn't been formally cleared. But McGuire wasn't the kind of pilot who waited for green lights when the enemy was in reach. He was restless. Some say he didn't even eat that morning. He climbed into his P-38, Eileen, fueled by ambition and the weight of unfinished business, they took off from Dulag and headed west, flying low over the jungles and rivers of the Philippine interior. The sky was mostly clear, with scattered clouds, perfect visibility for both sides. As they approached the town of Fabrica on Negros Island, they spotted a lone Japanese fighter below them, a Ki-43, Oscar. It was flown by Sergeant Akira Sugimoto, an experienced Japanese ace. Sugimoto wasn't alone. Within minutes, more enemy fighters appeared in the distance, possibly Ki-84, Franks, one of Japan's newer and deadlier aircraft. A dogfight erupted quickly. The skies went from silent to electric. Machine guns blazed, engines screamed. The sky became a chessboard of death. McGuire, hoping to support his wingman Benham, executed a tight, low-altitude turn to engage the Oscar. But he was flying low and slow, two things he had always warned against. He was trying to force a kill, trying to get number 39, but as he turned, his aircraft stalled. His P-38 snapped into an unrecoverable position. Witnesses said his wing dipped hard, the engines coughed, and the aircraft began to roll. He had no altitude to recover. Eileen plunged into the jungle and exploded on impact. No one could believe it. The man who had flown over 400 combat hours, the man who had survived countless missions, was gone in an instant, just like that. The news hit the 475th like a punch to the chest. Word spread across the Pacific like wildfire. McGuire, one of the last great living aces of the war, was gone. There would be no 39th kill, no triumphant return home, just a broken aircraft in a remote Philippine jungle, and the heavy silence of what could have been. Recovery teams reached the crash site later. The wreckage confirmed the worst. McGuire's body was buried in the Philippines, though it would later be reinterred at Arlington National Cemetery. The Army posthumously awarded him the Medal of Honor, citing his heroism, leadership, and sacrifice. His 38 confirmed kills remained second only to Richard Bong. But for many, that number no longer mattered. What mattered was the man. McGuire's death sent shockwaves through the Air Corps. Many pilots saw him as invincible. He had flown more missions than almost anyone. He had taught so many how to survive, and now he was gone. The cost of war became real again, even for the legends. Back home, newspapers mourned his loss. Time magazine ran a feature titled "Second to None." His wife, Eileen, received the news with quiet dignity. She never remarried. She kept his letters, his medals, and his memory. The Air Force later named McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey in his honor, a permanent reminder of a man who gave everything in pursuit of excellence. But if you talk to pilots today, those who study the war, those who fly in his shadow, they'll tell you this: McGuire was more than a number. He was the pilot who showed up every morning, reviewed every flight plan, made sure his men were ready, and flew through hell for them. He wasn't chasing glory. He was chasing perfection. He may have fallen short of 40, but in every other way, Thomas McGuire flew higher than most men could ever dream. In the days after McGuire's death, a heavy quiet settled over the 475th Fighter Group. The man who had driven them to precision, to discipline, to greatness, was no longer walking the dusty flight line with his checklist in hand, inspecting tires and machine guns. His absence was more than physical. It felt like the Pacific sky itself had dimmed. The jungle crash site, where McGuire's P-38, Eileen, went down, became a place of pilgrimage for his comrades. Some walked there in silence, brushing aside the vines, standing in the shadows of the broken trees. They found fragments of the plane, shards of metal, and personal items scorched by fire. The smell of burned fuel still hung in the air. It was raw, it was real, and it changed them. McGuire's tent was left untouched for days. His maps, flight logs, and spare boots sat just as he'd left them. His flight book, meticulously kept, remained open on the small desk, marked with a red pencil at victory. Number 38. The page after that was blank. What made McGuire's death sting more was how avoidable it might have been. He had warned others countless times never to slow down in combat, never to fight at low altitude against nimble opponents. He had lived by those rules for years. But on that fateful day, for just a few seconds, he broke his own code. Maybe it was the pressure, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fate. In the months that followed, his story became part of every airman's education. He wasn't just remembered for his kills, but for his discipline. McGuire became the example of both brilliance and tragedy, the cautionary tale of chasing a number, the embodiment of sacrifice. And then there was Richard Bong. Back in the States, Bong had become a public hero. With 40 kills, he was technically America's top ace. He'd been pulled from combat early and was flying test missions as a war Bond icon. But in August 1945, just one day before the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki, Bong died in a crash during a test flight of a new P-80 jet. 2 aces, 2 legends. Both gone before the end of the war. Their rivalry never truly ended. It was as if destiny refused to let one outlive the other. The war that had created their fame had also taken everything from them. But in their sacrifice, something deeper was born, an unshakable symbol of American air power, valor, and the cost of obsession. Over the years, Thomas McGuire's story has been kept alive not just by historians, but by those who knew what it meant to fly into hell and back. His name was carved into memorials, honored in squadrons, and whispered in hangars where pilots still learn to fly by the book, his book. In Ridgewood, New Jersey, and Sebring, Florida, plaques stand in his name. At McGuire Air Force Base, his portrait hangs high in the entrance hall. In aviation museums, his photo often appears beside that of Bong, not as competitors, but as eternal wingmen. 2 men cut from different cloth, but sewn into the same legacy. What separated McGuire from most pilots wasn't just his skill, it was his mindset. He believed in preparation. He studied enemy tactics like a scientist. He trained his men like a football coach drills plays. When he wasn't in the air, he was teaching. And when he was teaching, he was flying again in his mind, reliving each turn, each burst of gunfire, each heartbeat. Those who fought beside him described a man who was focused, intense, and sometimes distant, but never unkind. He had a way of pushing others to be better without raising his voice. When he flew, his wingmen felt safer. They felt confident, because McGuire didn't just chase enemy fighters, he chased perfection. In the years after the war, as America entered the jet age, new aces would rise in Korea and Vietnam, but McGuire's legacy held firm. His story was one of the few from World War II that pilots still told in flight schools and officer briefings. Because in McGuire, there was something timeless. Courage without arrogance, skill without recklessness, and a drive so powerful it consumed him. Many have debated whether McGuire should have been pulled from combat earlier, like Bong. Others argue that he wouldn't have accepted it, that he needed to finish what he started. In the end, McGuire died doing exactly what he believed he was born to do: flying, fighting, leading. And there's something profoundly American in that. In the idea that a farm boy from Florida, armed with a twin-engine fighter and a dream, could rise through sheer willpower to become one of the deadliest pilots in the history of air combat, that he could rewrite what it meant to lead, that he could give everything, even his life, for the men beside him. Today, if you stand at McGuire Air Force Base and look out across the runways, you might catch the roar of engines overhead. The shadows of modern jets pass across the tarmac, but behind them, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of a P-38 Lightning slicing through a tropical sky, chasing something just out of reach. Victory, glory, a name in history, Thomas. McGuire may have died with 38 kills, but he soared into eternity with something far greater. The respect of every pilot who's ever gripped a throttle, stared into the sun, and wondered if today would be the day their story was written. In fire and steel, McGuire never landed from his last mission. But in the hearts of all who fly, he never stopped soaring.